Perfect. I actually have to say that out loud so I remember. But welcome everybody. Okay. So I know we have a lot of material to cover, but we're going to keep going through the IDF 800 workbook. And the point of this, which we talked about in our last meeting, which you all seem to enjoy, is I'm going to help narrow down all of the material to study. So we've got, I know I've said an hour usually for these classes, but for this particular class, I did set aside an hour and a half, and my plan is to go today all the way up to uh, module 805. So if you have to leave, if you're here for an hour and only have an hour and have to leave, leave. That's okay. But remember, this whole session is recorded so that you can catch up on anything you missed. All right, enough rambling, right? Remember to keep yourself on mute if you don't mind. But if you do have a question, please do chime in. Okay, just to get started, and if I talk too fast, let me know as well. But we're on page 60. And keywords to remember for this page: mesophilic cultures. And a lot of things, you guys, I've gone through this book today, and I've kind of made sure like what I'm focusing on, and you'll see a lot of things are going to be repeated. So don't freak out that you're highlighting a lot of stuff, because a lot of things you'll see repeated in here. But mesophilic cultures, you are going to get asked 1 to 4 questions about that. Thermophilic cultures, know that as well. Rods versus cockeye, absolutely. Know a little bit about that. We're going on to page 61. Now, starter culture information, we're going to get more specifics. I'll lead you to more information coming up. But the important part on page 61 here is the important reference terms regarding cultures. So this is the area I've highlighted here where the bullet points are. The acidifier, proteolysis, proteolytic, dialytic, and gas production. You're going to need to know those. And I've highlighted here culture house versus proprietary house culture. There'll probably be at least one question about house cultures on your test. Okay, we're just going to keep rolling through, my friends. And now we're on page 62. This is all pretty important here. So house culture, focus on all these and think of them as definitions. House culture, mother culture, absolutely. Secondary cultures, natural cultures, all of these. Preparation of the starter culture. Again, as we go along and are studying, the highlights are what's important in the cheese world. Cultures, part of making cheese, are highly important. So you're going to get asked about that. All righty. The stages I don't find quite as important. The biggest thing to end up on page 62 is going to be our bacteriophage control and prevention strategies. This is huge. So as we go along, and part of what I was thinking when preparing for today is, reiterating the fact, if it has to do with cheese making or at any stage of the cheese making or selling process where something could make somebody sick, remember to focus on that, because you're going to get asked definitely about anything of that. And bacteriophage. Ooh, if I could highlight that word about 5 times, I would. That's a very important term for you to know. All righty. Continuing on to page 63. All righty. Natural cultures found in raw milk and in cheese plant environments. That's a good thing to know. Again, when you see the word cultures, especially when raw milk pops up on any of your study materials, boom, you're going to need to know that. The rest of that, this is good information to know, but I'm going to take you a little bit further down and focus a little bit more of your study time on handling and storage issues. So what's going to be important in handling cheese throughout the cheese making, cheese storing, cheese aging, and cheese selling process are temperatures. So know in your head and make a note that at temperatures for all of these stages, you are going to need to know those. Color. Color is here. Hopefully all of you know about annatto. If you're at this stage of your cheese study, know what annatto is, where it comes from, and a little bit of the background of why it's used. because you will get, I would say at least at minimum one, but probably not more than 2 questions on food coloring. But we know that that's a big one, right? Now we're moving on to page. And remember, please, if you don't mind, to give yourself a mute. Just double check, please. Thank you. All righty. So here's just more information about annatto. Now it's got other color alternatives. I don't remember getting asked much about other, because more often than not, what you're going to see, the biggest coloring agent is annatto and cheese. So I wouldn't spend as much time on all of the other added colors. Okay. But here again, we've got sources of color in cheese. This section here isn't about dye added to cheese, but more about how cheese, gets its color. So whether it comes through natural grass-fed cow's milk. So know a little bit about that too, because that's where they could in the test ask you, well, the natural part of color in cheese versus not. And of course, understanding that, why you don't see the yellow hue in goat milk, right? You guys should already know about that and their lack of ability to process that beta carotene. Okay. Now we're going to keep rocking and rolling. I sound like an old person when I say that, I know. To page 65. Okay. Here I find the most important sections to cover on this page are this section here, preventing color fade in grass-based natural cheeses. Because when thinking about cheese as well, it's not only how is this cheese colored, but what could make a cheese fade. So hit up on that. And the biggest thing I found in here, this problem is pink discoloration when they're talking about it, is this last sentence. This discoloration can be prevented by total exclusion of light and storage in an oxygen-free atmosphere. That just gives you an example of how you can prevent some things. The next thing to concentrate on, of course, is going to be controlling color fade in natural. I think I already mentioned that. So finish up with this paragraph as well. And then I found it very interesting. Light-induced oxidization. So this very last paragraph on page 65, light-induced oxidization occurs when oxygen is available, hence reducing the oxygen content of the headspace by vacuum packaging or displacement with carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and modified atmosphere packaging. So modified atmosphere packaging, MAP, make a note of that too. Because when thinking about packaging in the cheese world, and we'll come up again on it a little bit further, but it's not just about, don't take the cheesemonger hat off and think about, cheese makers also have to focus on how to package their cheese to ship it to you. So it's not just the cheesemonger aspect that you have to remember as far as packaging. And a lot of that stuff can be found for a separate reference, the best practice guide for cheese makers. I'm gonna throw that term out there again too, as far as that packet, because that's the thing you can go back on to follow up for more information on this particular topic. Okay, 66. We're continuing on. Now the conclusions, this section here where it says conclusions, the increased yellow color of grass-based cheese is a positive attribute. Consumers may see it as a value-added product. That's something to remember and highlight as you're reading through all of this information, whether this packet or the not, because that sounds like a good little fact that you could check on. Customers see it as a value-added product when they see the color in there. Okay. Continuing on with page 66, calcium chloride. I would definitely know. Now we're going to get into, and you'll see like this is going to be a lot in your glossary. So you'll see this term come up a lot as well, but absolutely know what calcium chloride is and what we use it for with cheese. How does it affect cheese? Of course, know what a coagulant is. Hopefully you all are at a point in your cheese career where you know the coagulants by heart and you get that out of there. Chymosin, know about that. Gene technology, not so much. I would read it. But the chymosin, this one here, I would know that one big time. Moving on now to page 67. Again, I would suggest to read through all of this, but the big thing here, lipase. Boom. I would know that inside and out. Again, page 67, lipase, know that. No lipases, this little, the colored bar down here. And especially, you know, it's not just what it is as far as lipases, but the benefits. It's a flavor enrichment, a better scent. So like, why would you want that in your cheese? And questions could be formed around that. And it would be flavor enrichment, a better scent, and the reduction of ripening time. So you see how that one little box could be one question for you on the test, where they would multiple choice it and give you like pick the three that make the most sense, and it would be those three listed here, but they would offer three more that don't make sense. So that's how your mind needs to be focusing while studying. All righty, and continuing on with page 67. Now this is so lipases as far as like how does it affect the flavor of different milk types? This is what when you see calf, kid, lamb, what they're talking about is how does lipases affect different milk types? Think that. So cow milk, it's going to add a mild, piquant flavor, uh, you know, which is like pleasant butter. For goat, it's going to be a little bit more of a sharper piquant flavor, more like provolone. And with sheep milk, you're going to get that strong marked flavor like pecorino romano. So that's when thinking about how does it affect different milk types. So I would definitely know that too. All right, at page 68. All righty, the top part, using lipases in cheese making. I've got that. Now, as far as now using it, definitely understand, but don't narrow yourself down so much. Like when to add, how to add, the dosage rate. If you are a cheese maker and an expert, you would want to know that. For the test, that's probably too detailed. Okay, so let's skip on down. Let's skip on down here to salt. I love my salt. Salt is definitely something to know inside and out. You know, when you see references to salt, salt is a huge deal in the cheese world, of course. So know about all that. I've got in my book, as you see me continuously looking over, potassium chloride. Study that. And if you get a chance, if you're coming on board, please do make sure to mute yourself when you're coming in. All righty. So potassium chloride, know about that, the blends. Now we're going to page 69. Now the grades, you know, really that's not so much needing to know. I wouldn't focus so much time on that. Uh, that's not going to be necessarily asked. But salt here, the next one though, salt is commonly added as an ingredient in the cheese making in 4 ways. Yeah, I would want to know that for sure for the test, especially whether you're going to be a dry rub or a brine solution. Okay. And it could get a little bit specific as far as, you know, which type is better for which style of cheese. They're probably not going to get too far down that rabbit hole, but definitely with brining and the dry rub. Okay. Moving on down further. So this is, you know, definitely read through this. But the biggest highlighted point down here is going to be halloumi. Halloumi. I'm going to say that word one more time, and I hope you write it down. Halloumi. You're gonna. I recall. I don't know if I recall, but maybe I was asked a question about that on my test. Halloumi. Know that how it's made, how salt affects it, and also when I'm calling out, I'm going to call out a lot of cheeses today. It's not just knowing how it's made, but is it protected? Where does it come from? Because we're going to get deeper into that too. Excellent. Now moving on to page 70. More salt. And here, this I don't know what color that is. Is that orange? I'm going to call it orange. I don't know that so much, but the box, I would highlight that, knowing that salt acts as a binder to water curds or cheeses when it dehydrates cheese to the required moisture content. Know that. That's a good thing to remember. And we're going to continue on. And again, read through this. We, you know, understand how salt helps form a rind. Um, but again, you're probably going to get asked maybe 1, maybe 2 questions about that. So have a good understanding. But to highlight something more, I've got salt and ambient humidity. This is something I've got highlighted in my book as far as when I went back to study and to review this information under that page. is more important than the rest. All right, page 71. Flavoring. Again, this goes back to flavoring. Know that you can add flavors, but at the more the flavors that they're going to ask about in the cheese society are going to have to do with salts and cultures and how salt and cultures affect flavors and aging. Think about more of the natural cheese aspect than them. They're not going to ask you questions about where does this brand of pepper jack get their jalapenos. That's not going to be on the test. That's not to worry about. But what will be adjuncts. So altering this one here, altering cheese properties through adjuncts. That's what you need to know. So read through that. And then we're going to keep going, and you'll see again, we're going to go through a lot of the same material here. But highly important, Brevibacterium linens. So when talking about the rinds, this is what to study, and even study more. It's not just this sentence, but understand Brevibacterium linens. Geotrichum candidum. I know you've heard these before. Penicillium candidum. Know what cheeses those go on. That's important. If you have especially a protected cheese with the DOP, AOC, any protected cheese, or a very popular American-made cheese like Humboldt Fog. Hope you're making notes when I'm giving you all these hints. I would know about what kind of rind is on a Humboldt Fog. Okay. And then, of course, so Penicillium roqueforti. Absolutely, you got to know about that. Probionic acid bacteria, PAB. You're going to get, yeah, so know about that too, because those are the eye formation. This is the sense of, with Emmentaler and the traditional look that most people think cheese looks like. And you know what? Oddly, it doesn't. Okay. So now we're going to continue on to page 72. Here, now we're getting into more far as the makeups of what makes up milk versus the components of cheese. But the components of milk, no. You know that you're going to have water, whey, minerals, protein. Know the components of milk. Here, the big thing is I've got highlighted water. A fat. It's kind of like milk is. Milk is approximately 87% water. That's a general thing and a good thing to know. Like, they may not ask you, since that's a general question, it's approximately 87%, but they could ask, what is the highest percentage component of milk? And it could list out, water could be one of the choices. So that could be how that question could be phrased. All righty, know about your carbohydrates. I love me some carbohydrates, dadgummit. But again, so milk is approximately 4.9% carbohydrate, form of lactose. Just more along the lines, know your tiers. Water, lactose. What is the bulk of each area? And then, of course, you got fat. You're going to have fat in your milk. So know about that. Continuing on now to page 73, continuing moving. The big thing to worry here is now the conjunction lionectic acid, not a big, I don't recall much about that on the test, but we do want to go down to protein. Protein. This is the big one you're going to get to. So you see how we started with milk and we're moving on down, but protein is a percentage of milk. So we need to know that. Continuing on through page 73, vitamins as a sense of that they're part of the milk construction as well. All righty, now we're moving on to page 74. So this, oh my God, there's so many words here. That's a lot. This is almost like a glossary, right? But to focus on this part of this glossary, thiamine, I would know this. Vitamin B1, I would know riboflavin. I would circle that one. You're going to get asked about that, I'm pretty sure. So the riboflavin, no. And then let's skip on down. Read these, absolutely, but focus more so on minerals down here at the bottom of page 74. I would focus more on minerals. I would focus more on calcium. Again, those are the things that are focused more in cheese. And again, you're getting the overarching aspect of being an expert. You're not a cheese maker just yet, so you don't need to know every little detail. All right, and moving on now to page 75. You got a lot. know about, of course, I mean, know about what iron is, magnesium. But as far as getting a question asked on the test, you're probably gonna get a better chance of being asked about potassium and sodium. Those are going to be the overarching aspects. All righty, continuing, moving down page 75, where to focus. All righty. Lipases. We mentioned that before. I would know that, how it affects the flavor. That's a big one. You can get asked several questions just on that one particular word, but know that and know lactase. Absolutely. All righty. Milk and human health have an understanding of, but there's nothing specific that, like, I don't read that and see a specific question coming out of that kind of fact. But I would understand a little bit of it. But now we're moving on to page 76. One thing that does affect our industry at every single level: milk and allergies. So this is this highlight this whole section: milk and allergies, because that affects everybody. Um, and the highlight in the milk and allergies that I've got here, there are two main categories of proteins in milk: the caseins and the whey proteins. That sounds like a question to me. That sounds like it could be a fact. So I'd highlight that and understand that a little bit more. And then let's move on with this information. A lot of that we can move past, and we're going to go down. We're going to go over to page 77. All righty. Here, anytime we see milk and lactose intolerance, again, that is something that affects the cheese industry at every aspect. So, milk and the lactose intolerance. Know about that. More so with lactose intolerance, of course, know the definition and know how to tell if you have it or not. And I've highlighted down at the bottom of page 77 the last paragraph. I found that that was very helpful when I was studying. So the last paragraph of page 77 is probably going to be your most helpful paragraph of all. Okay, page 78. Raw milk consumption. You know, so if you're on here and you're thinking, well, is raw milk a big deal in the cheese industry? Yes, absolutely it is. So make sure that I've got that highlighted. And that's something important to know. And of course, I've got in the first paragraph of raw milk what you're more than likely going to be asked: wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You will get asked, and hopefully you already know, how old does a cheese have to be aged? How long does a cheese have to be aged to be legally sold as a raw milk? The 60-day rule. That's important in our industry. I hope you know that. But know the why under here. So in the first paragraph, it's going to talk about more of the why. All righty. So quite honestly, I found the first paragraph of raw milk consumption the most important, but read all through that. All righty, now on to the next page, which is going to be 79. And now we're on page 79. How the body digests and absorb nutrients. So this is good to know as a person. You're going to need to know more about how a cow digests grass or food, more so than how we humans digest. Just to understand from the fact that, we lose our enzyme growing up as far as to become, whether we're lactose intolerant or tolerant. That's the main focus on that. And I've got highlighted the first step in mechanal digestion is the mouth. Chewing food to break it down into small pieces. Saliva secreted by the salivary gland contains water that helps us dissolve food and make it easier to swallow. That's the most, after I read all this, that's where most of your question may come from as far as the test. Okay. All right, so that covered the whole section. We're finished with that one. Awesome. So that covers page 80. And now I'm going to keep moving to module 802, and we're just going to keep rolling through here. Now, I did make a note on my book, and I started with an ugly, hairy looking star on my page, but best guide or best practices for cheese makers. So the cheese making process, Also review this module against and with the best guide for cheesemakers. That's on the ACS website. So a lot of the information is also found in there, and I find that the best practices for cheesemakers consolidates its information maybe a little bit better than this module here in this book. But I'm going to highlight again the words to study and go back and reference it against the other guide, if that makes sense. And that'll put you in a good frame of mind. Okay. Because a lot can happen, as far as so getting milk from the farm and to the cheesemaker, a lot can go on. And you will get asked several questions in that area. But here I've started with accepting milk. So transportation and storage of milk for cheese making. I would want to know that. I'm highlighting that part, especially with the degrees. So when a truck comes up, milk is obtained from the cow or the other animals under sanitary conditions and is cooled to 45 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 hours of milking. That sounds like an interesting fact to me, and I would want to highlight that. Milk storage, again, now we want to focus on safety. So in any of these questions that are talking about milk storage or transport, they're going to want to know where can cross-contamination happen? Where can you get sick? Is it going to be from temperature or cross-contamination? And that's where I would highlight my train of thought while going through this process. So milk storage, again, you're talking about temperatures. That's a good thing to remember in 72 hours. So know everything under the milk storage highlighted right here. Milk cans, milk pump. Know that there are those, but I don't remember anything specific coming up from that. Cold storage of milk prior to pasteurization. That's something to remember. So the last paragraph on page 82, that's a keeper. And then moving on, and also I'm blowing through this because if you've highlighted these and you go back and reference your best guide for cheesemakers, you'll see that there's a lot more detailed going in that booklet. But for next, page 83, this the highlighted box. That's what you want to remember, this highlighted box here. The effects of cold storage may be divided into those that are generally reversible on heating. Know all that. All right. And we're moving along to page 84. What a beautiful day of studying we're having here. Milk storage conditions. So this first, so under here, milk storage conditions, refrigerated storage of milk is conducive to the growth of psychotrophic bacteria. Highlight that, know it, love it, live it. These bacteria usually come from, and this is where you could get, with psychotrophic bacteria, this is where you can get a couple questions maybe about one thing. To know that these bacteria typically come from the cow's environment, such as dirt and manure. That's something to remember. So you'll see we're going to get deep into some of this technical stuff, but you'll need to know that specific. Okay. And we're continuing on. And here, as we continue going through here, psychotrophic bacteria are often associated with poorly cleaned, refrigerated farm bulk tanks. So I would highlight that when studying the psychotrophic bacteria. But hopefully when you see all these words of all these bacteria, you need to know, where does it come from? How do we clean it? And also, what does it give you? So we're going to continue on now. Bacteria. So the next paragraph I'm highlighting here, bacterial contamination of milk is likely to occur during collection and transport as a result of contact with transport tankers, hoses, pumps. That's another little fact to know. And again, continuing on, psychotrophic bacteria commonly produce. So know about that. So pretty much on page 84, psychotrophic bacteria, know it inside and out. Milk testing. This is just to know that before milk can be unloaded at the processing plant, each load is tested for antibiotics. Okay, now we're moving to page 85. Now we're talking about pasteurization. So we're moving on to pasteurization. You got to know all these. Like this is now this graph right here as far as like testing for bacteria. This is also going to be a graph again in your cheese making guide from the ACS website. But you need to know individual producer does not exceed 100,000 milliliter total bacteria. Know all these. This somatic cell count does not exceed 750,000. Know that. Somatic cell count. And really just kind of get that whole chart into your into your heart. What it's really talking about here is, you know, animals have to be given antibiotics more often than not, especially if they have mastitis, which is the infection of the udder. You know, if you don't give the animal antibiotics, there's a chance they could die. So they want to save their animals, so they're going to give them antibiotics, but they don't want to sell milk from any animal that's taking antibiotics. So those are moved from the herd, isolated away, and milked through until that milk is tested with no antibiotics. That's what a lot of this information is getting the point that they're trying to get across to. But for the page in facts to remember on page 85, let's continue. The plate count agar or PCA, know that. Coliform count, know that. Somatic cell count, again, that's something to remember, and the standard plate count. And I remember they did give numbers, so that graph up top is important to remember. And now the last box, the standard plate count, know that as well. So this is very important in our business, is making sure we don't pass along illnesses to our customers. So page 85, very important. Okay, moving on to page 86. And that talks more about antibiotics and milk. Know about that. You know, we don't sell nobody is legally able to sell antibiotics and milk, but know that they do occur. All righty. And then on page 86, continuing on the frequently asked questions, that's a fun little box. I think that's something worth knowing. Everything else here is highlighted too much. I would read through this, but I don't remember exact questions on the test coming from most of what's on page 86. That's really specific information. But on the other hand, on page 87, this is a very important page. Mastitis and somatic cell count. You got to know that. That's extremely important. Mastitis. You will 100% get asked about mastitis. What is it? How do you get it? And what do you get from it? Okay. Again, somatic cells, just a lot of this is repeating. Somatic cell count, again, very important, absolutely. And the standard plate count. So we kind of went over that before, but reiterating the fact, know about all those. All right, now page 88, not as much information as needed from there, but the second paragraph on page 88 is highly important. High bacteria counts more than 10,000 suggests that bacteria are entering milk from a variety of possible sources. This is what I'm talking about, knowing where these contaminations can happen. Okay. The rest of it, you know, of course, I got to say read, but that was the most important part on page 88. So now we're going to page 89. Page 89. Advantages to using raw milk. Now, raw milk, oftentimes, you know, we romanticize it. We want to make sure that we're learning facts. Anything on the test is going to be facts. So is it actually higher in protein? Is it higher? You know, is it, you know, are the more beneficial things actually testable is what I'm trying to get across to you. So read through the advantages of using raw milk. You know, your cheese will have more flavor. That's a general statement. So that's not necessarily a test question, I wouldn't think. All righty, but note that the disadvantages of using raw milk, let's see, expense, of course. The most important part about using raw milk, though, on page 89 is the risk. The risk is going to be the most important aspect here. Now we're going back and talking about heat treatments and pasteurization which there's going to be a graph coming up, but I would highlight the purpose of pasteurization. I would know about that because that is a fact. To increase milk safety for the consumer by destroying disease-causing microorganisms that may be present in milk. So that's a fact. So you could get asked definitely something about that, but pasteurization is big to us. Moving down on page 89, pasteurization conditions. Know that the PMO, Pasteurized Milk Ordinance, know what that is. Jot down PMO, make you a flashcard about that. All righty. Now we're continuing on to page 90. There's your big one. There's your big graph right there. The things to remember, so you got pasteurization type. There's going to be another graph in your best guide for cheesemakers book. But you need to know high temperature, short time. So HTST. You need to know that, the difference between that versus HHST. Those are good ones. All righty. Now we're continuing down page 90 for the history of pasteurization. Guys, you got to know who invented pasteurization. So especially here in the second paragraph, you need to know about Louis Pasteur and the fact that, you know, he came about pasteurization by trying to improve the keeping qualities of wine. That may be a fun fact to remember. And then, of course, in 1924, the U.S. Public Health Service developed the Standard Milk Ordinance, or PMO. So know about PMO as well. Okay, page 91. Fluid milk definitions. You're going to see, again, there's a lot of definitions coming around, but know the definition of milk. Milk is defined by the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, the lacterial secretion practically free from colostrum obtained from the complete milking of one or more healthy cows. Know that inside and out. Pasteurization, of course, know what that is. And again, you're going to see high temperature, short time, but highlight pasteurization. Specialty milk beverages, I would definitely read through that. You're not going to get a whole lot about milk beverages because you're going to focus mainly on milk and cheese. But of course, any dairy product is fair game for a question to be asked, whether it be yogurt, kefir, quark, creme fraiche, so on. All righty, now we're moving to page 92. And here I've highlighted the advantages to using pasteurized milk. That's a good thing to remember. And the disadvantages to using pasteurized milk. I would read through that. All right. Now moving to page 93. We're going to talk about some vats. All right, so the vats. I think my southern accent really messes that up. VAT. Open vats, we've got that it's generally the most common. That's what your picture on the right. And I got a note here in my book where I say, focus on how to clean the vats and what contaminants come from not cleaning. And this is absolutely in your guide for your best practices for cheesemakers. Go back and look at the vats, and that's a bacteriophage. Throwing that out there. This is where a lot of that can happen. You know, they're going to have a steam jacketed vat, but I don't see them really focusing on you understanding the differences between all of the milk vats that make cheese, but more along the lines of how to keep them clean and what cross-contamination can occur. Okay. So I didn't highlight a lot from page 93 because you need to focus on that in your best practices for cheesemakers. Same thing for page 94. We're going to continue down 94. They got a lot of the steps down here. Anti-swirl step. Like, I don't recall a lot about these steps specifically being on there, but again, it's the steps of cleaning. I can't tell you enough the steps of cleaning that you need to remember. So we're going to continue on now to page 95. That's again, it's all good information to know, but not so much on your test. 95, we're going to continue down to where we get heat treated milk. That's important for us to know. And you'll see, like why did I highlight that? Because the next sentence starts with, for food safety reasons. Again, if you're reading through any of this and you see a statement like that, food safety, highly important. Read through that. So heat treatment of milk, highlight that. And this is where you get into a little bit more as far as vat pasteurization, HTST pasteurization, ultra high temperature. That's a good box to know right there. At the bottom of page 95, kind of helps shorten up that other box, basically. Then, of course, again, know the ultra high heat, high temperature right here, ultra high temperature, UHT. Okay, 96. We are looking for, there's a lot of good information on page 96. You're not going to get asked a lot about gamma irradiation, ultraviolet light. Like they're not going to ask you, like pasteurization that we use most of the times aren't going to be these. So I wouldn't worry about that. But I would worry more about cheese must be aged for 60 days. We've hit on that again. You will get asked that. Cheese, and that's for raw milk, right? And now we're going to continue on with, I've got standardization. Again, we're at the bottom of page 96. Standardization, know about that. Oh, and homogenization. Oh my goodness, you better know about that. That's going to come up in pretty much every glossary that you have, though. Absolutely know about that. And if you go to the top of page 97, you got the purpose right here. I would highlight the first paragraph, the top of 97. You will more than likely get asked about homogenization. Absolutely. All righty, and continuing on 97. Setting the milk for cheese making. This is good to know. I would just know that there's rennet set versus acid set. That's probably your biggest one. Know that you don't necessarily have to have rennet to have an acid set cheese, but what is an acid set cheese? I would know that. Coming back down, cutting or breaking the curd, I've got highlighted. You're probably not going to get too specific into that, but understand again the principles. You will get asked a question somehow along the way of, the size of the curd does attribute to the aging process or what that cheese is basically going to be. You're not going to have a ladled curd Reggiano. Basically, that grana style is rice size or grain. All righty, continuing on down to page 97. I've got, determining optimal time to cut the curd. Under that one, you're getting introduced to this phrase here, critical control point. Critical control point. You're going to need to know what that is. That's coming into food safety. And the very last paragraph here on page 97, absolutely know that. The last paragraph on page 97, this little blurb. Okay, 98. And this gives you that which I was talking about on the last page, lactic acid coagulation cheeses. Yeah, absolutely. You got to know about that. Rennet coagulated cheeses. Understand what that means. Methods I would understand, but probably not going to get too many questions asked about that. But you will get asked about flocculation. Flocculation point on page 98. Know those. Now moving on to page 99. Again, the flocculation, know about that. They're not going to get too deep into it. I would understand the overarching aspect of it. But cooking the curds on page 99. I find that a very helpful thing to know. And really looking at those temperatures. Then I would understand the rest of it, but I didn't see a whole lot of questions coming out of everything behind that. So let's continue on now to page 100. Roles of salt in cheese making. And you'll see again, like we've hit on that before, but just keep knowing salt in cheese making important. I highlighted that. And now we're going down to, of course, salt's magic powers. Read through that. The types of salt. Now we're at types of salt here in the middle of page 100. That's probably going to be a little bit more important. Unrefined sea salt is the general salt of choice. That's something to remember, a kosher salt. Surface salt, surface salting versus brining, that's already in previous chapters. Keep going on that. Now let's move to page 101. And the biggest thing for the test that I think to focus on is at the bottom of page 101, the 5 most critical parameters to control in your brining operation. So do understand brining, but like the bottom there, that's your most important stuff to study, as well as the box at the bottom. Okay. So much info. Now we're moving on to page 102. Now I've got this. I made a mark on my book. Read through all of it. Handling and manufacturing cheeses. So we're covering here aging cheeses, just distributing cheeses, displaying cheeses. So now we're probably getting more into the realm of the cheesemonger aspect of it. Things to highlight though, when we're thinking of aging cheese and handling cheese, again, if it sticks out to as a critical control point, as any area where that cheese could get contaminated, or we need to focus on the temperature of that cheese, that's what you need to focus on when we're reading through here. So what I read through and got was under aging cheese, here in the middle, contaminating microorganisms from raw milk in the environment, biofilms on the dairy equipment, or plant personnel may have found their way to the cheese during the cheese making process. Their activity in the cheese is influenced by the cheese composition. That's what I wanted to focus on. So I'm going to highlight this right here. The activity in the cheese is influenced by the cheese composition, temperature, pH, salt content, water activity, and the amount of oxygen present in their environment. That's a big sentence to highlight. And the next one, and again, this is all important. Distributing cheese. Under distributing cheese, I've got this second sentence is super important. Temperature abuse is a common problem during transport. It can accelerate the microbial activity and increase the potential for defects. So that's when I'm reading through that paragraph, that's what sticks out to me. All righty, and now displaying cheese. I've got really the first sentence here. Key factors in cheese displays that affect cheese quality are packaging, lighting, and storage temperature. All righty. And now we're moving down to the last paragraph on page 102. Where it's talking about the lighting and bleaching. So I've got here lighting intent. So the second sentence, well, the first and second sentence really of the intensity of fluorescent light. I would know about that. And especially like if you're a cheesemonger, have you ever gotten those? I like the third sentence. Higher light intensities will cause pink discoloration or bleaching in annatto colored cheeses and oxidized flavors in all those types of cheeses. So bleaching of cheese is a big deal in my cheesemongering world. So there's probably a chance that's going to get asked. All righty, now we're moving to page 103. Effects of pH on cheese. Yeah, we need to know our pH. Effects of pH on cheese, that whole part. Now, it's a lot to try to understand with the pH of cheese. They're not going to get too technical with it, but you have your pH versus acidity. But I've got in the third paragraph, that first sentence, this highlight here, the temperature increases. This is what you need to really focus on. what I'm highlighting here. First two sentences of paragraph 3. All righty. And we're moving on to page 104. Calcium phosphate in cheese. Highlight that. And going down to the bottom of page 104, measuring the pH of cheese. Highlight that section. Okay, that takes us on into Module 803. Look at there, we're moving along, team. So now we're at my Module 803, Affianage. Now we have almost reached the 1 hour mark, so I understand some of you may need to go. If you need to go, that's okay. This is being recorded, posted to the Institute du Fromage YouTube page. For those of you who can stay, ride this out because I'm going to go all the way through the end of Module 804. So we should be done within the next 30 to 45 minutes. All right. So Module 803, let's turn to page 108. All right. So affianage, of course, affianage means cheese aging. You may need to know what the word affianage means. Wink. And I've got highlighted here in my book the second paragraph, as this body of knowledge is a product of the American Cheese Society, it is preferred that the title of this domain be cheese ripening, which is the closest translation from the French term. So know then that within the body of the text, the term affineur or affianage will also be used. So even with that, the American Cheese Society has more long means they have adopted the term ripening when talking about aging. So just know that when you're reading the test, in case they throw out the term ripening and you're like, what are you talking about ripening? We're talking about cheese aging. Not that you get asked a question on the test about it, but you need to know what that means so you can take the test. Hopefully that makes sense. All righty. Under operations here, ventilation right here. So I've got that air circulation is necessary to keep the molds growing consistently. I see that being a question. And we're going to continue on down. Under humidity, I would read about humidity and know that the ideal cheese cave temperature used for aging is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That sounds like an easy little fact to remember. Now we're continuing down to the bottom of page 108. Just let that paragraph right there. I would know more about that. And talking about soft cheeses need high humidity and they ripen quickly. I wouldn't get so much as we're moving into the humidity numbers. Like I don't recall them getting so specific that what is the humidity preferred for soft ripened cheeses versus humidity for wash rind. Know more about the overarching aspect of it. All right, now number page 109. Temperature. Temperature is a big deal. Just in the cheese world. So this is something to remember there, especially that first paragraph. And knowing that the fact that the temperature of the aging room will also affect the ripening of the cheese. That's easy to remember. And that temperature usually ranges between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. So next is going to be the desiccation. So desiccation or drying, that's probably what more along the line. That's what you're going to ask about more so than what are the specific temperatures. Like what is desiccation? Like when talking about in cheese aging, it means the drying, and it limits the bacterial activity. So that's a good thing to remember on that one. I like read through, kind of understand these, the temperatures here, but that's not quite as important. But what are important, I mean, definitely read the roles of air in affianage. You just need to make sure, I do anticipate you getting asked a question about proper air flow. That's where they're going to focus is how would you make sure you have proper airflow in your cheese caves? That's like pulling the racks away from the wall. things like that. That's what you need to focus on. Humidity and temperature. And I've got it again in this one. The ideal cheese cave temperature used for aging is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. I've seen that twice now. You may want to remember that. Now, page 1010, let's keep 1010, 110. Let's keep rolling. Proper air circulation, again, know how you need to do that. I just brought that up. So maintaining proper air circulation is huge. And this second paragraph under that is what I highlighted in my book. When ripened in a well-ventilated aging room or space with consistent airflow, the cheeses should be placed on mats or wood or food-safe shelves with adequate spacing between the shelves and the cheeses. Things like that. That's a good thing to remember. All righty, now we're going to go to the bottom of page 110. Natural caves, it's cool. To think more about natural caves, I doubt you'll have questions about natural caves versus knowing which popular cheeses are aged in natural caves. One being Roquefort. So I want to now Roquefort, write that word down. That cheese in particular, know it inside and out. What milk type is it? Is it raw or pasteurized? What sheep, what breed does that milk come from? What year did it get its PDO, its protection? Roquefort, know it, love it, live it. It was the first cheese to ever be protected and considered the first blue cheese ever. It is a shining star in our cheese world and probably on the test. All righty. So now it's going differently. So you'll see on page 111, man-made caves. I would consider, like, is there anybody in this industry in the United States that is taking great care in creating caves for their state? I would focus like on Jasper Hill, and more so less the fact that they have the cellars, but what do the cellars do for Vermont? I know I threw a curveball at you, but that's, again, I'm trying. Like, you're not going to get asked, like, how do you make a man-made cheese cave? You're not going to get asked that. Bloomy Rind Cheese Cave. I'll definitely read through it. But again, for the Bloomy Rind, it's more about what is the Bloomy Rind. The Penicillium candidum, the Penicillium camberti. That's what you're going to get asked about. Wash Rind Cave, again, you'll get asked more about the Bacterium linens. Or you could get asked, should you age them together? And that would be a no, because they would cross-contaminate. All righty. And on the bottom of my page, I've got focus on temps and cleanliness and the term microflora, which I think if we flip over to the next page, the term microflora is eventually going to come up, but microflora. I would write that down. Okay, now to page 112. Again, they're covering different caves. This is very interesting. The thing to remember about caves more so is that that's where like the molds on the cheese get on the cave walls, stay on the cave walls. It's an idea of being seasoned cave walls. And that's what you're probably going to get more asked about, is like, what would cheeses pick up from cave walls? Microflora. Okay. Large format alpine cave. I'd read through it. You're probably not going to get asked necessarily about specific caves, but you will get asked about cold storage. Cold storage is important, whether we're on the making end or, again, the cheesemonger end, right? Drying room. I would know about a drying room. That's a little bit more specific before you actually put it into a cave. Let's see here. Now we're moving to page 113. Fabricated FE&I systems. I would know it, but probably not a question. I would say you would get a question here on page 113 is going to come from cleaning and sanitizing wood boards for cheese aging. So I would highlight that and understand the processes for that. And then practices for using, because aging cheese on wood is a big deal in our world, right? And cleanliness is too. So we're probably going to get asked questions about this. So everything under cleaning, now even practices for using woods, aging boards. I'll definitely know about those. And a lot of this is going to be common sense. SSOPs for wood aging, sanitizing standard operation procedure. So if you haven't written down sanitation standard operating procedure, SSOP, like you could like they could ask questions. They could throw out sanitation standard and throw in a different word than operating procedure, and ask you what is an SSOP, and you would have to pick out sanitation standard operating procedure. That could be a question. So know about that. All righty, now to page 114. 114, frequency of inspection. I've got more along the lines here. Cleaning and sanitizing procedure for wood aging boards. It's again, you got your steps. Know your steps here, 1 through 6. Okay. Survival of listeria after cleaning and sanitation of wood shelves. I'd read through that and know about that. All righty, now we're moving on to page 115. Again, all this is good to know, but temperature on this aspect. The temperature at which cheese is aged also depends on the variety of individual cheese will determine how quickly it ages. So we understand about temperature and a little bit about humidity. Like this is read throughs. I would focus more on this little box about bloomy rind and smear rind cheeses. All righty, we're going to continue on to page 116. Under molds, again, I would focus on this little box here under the word molds and microflora. I threw that word out earlier. So on page 116, that's where we're using cheese microflora. Absolutely know about those. And pathogens are opportunistic. Pathogens. Anytime you see, think about a pathogen, read that. Lactic acid bacteria. We've probably already talked about before, but highlight that. Lactic acid bacteria, know what that is. And of course, we're moving on to page 117. Thermalization, you will get asked about thermalization versus pasteurization. So page 117 is important, thermalization versus pasteurization. And of course, adjunct cultures. I thought page 117 was a good solid whole page. I would read 117. 117 is a good page altogether. All righty, now let's move on to page 118. And here under turning on page 118, the purpose of turning the cheese under storage is to get the right moisture distribution. That's what you need to remember about turning. Now we're continuing on page 118, moving forward. Cheese manufacturing methods. And again, I've got C guide for cheesemakers. So a lot of this stuff is going to be recounted again in and you'll see how important that the manual for cheese making that is. But what you want to get out of this right here is the term HACCP, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. Know that inside and out. You will have several questions, maybe 6 to 8, specifically about HACCP and HACCP plans. Know HACCP. All righty, packing materials. You're going to get a lot more information about the packing materials in the cheese making guide. But know that under packing materials or lack thereof, you'll see cheeses are packed to protect against physical, chemical, or microbial contamination. Packaging also reduces the loss of moisture from the cheese. There you go. So that's what to remember there. All righty. Now we're moving on to page 119, mites. Yeah, you need to know what cheese mites are, where they come from. We don't allow them in the U.S. United States, as far as definitely on our cheese counter. But know about cheese mites. You'll get asked probably one, maybe two questions about cheese mites. All righty. So moving down page 119, continuously on, where the smear ripened. That's what I got out of that page. On page 119, smear composition, general microbiology. I thought that was probably the most interesting part coming from that page. All right, and the blurb, the box at the end. All righty, moving to page 120. This box here, the telltale sign of B. linens, is reddish to orange to caramel color hue on the cheese surface. These bacteria, as they break down the proteins, generate the dirty socks and garlic aroma. You already know about that, but no, relearn that again. Let's see. In the other box, smear ripen with your pH. Know that. And this is just continuing on salting and brine and rind development. You should already, this is just mentioned several times. Now what I do have is smear. Understand what smear is. Smear ripened. And I've got here the application of smear. I don't know how many times I can say smear. It doesn't sound right with a southern accent for sure. All righty. Now we're moving on to page 121. And I'm going to highlight a couple of things for you guys and send you some more information about specific American cheeses and specific European cheeses to read up on and know. But here I'm going to just highlight these because you're probably going to get asked questions about these on your test. So Epoisse, very important cheese to know. I call it one of the big dogs, so to speak. Learn about Epoisse, even Von Trapp family Oma. So if you're not familiar with Von Trapp family Oma, look it up. Cato Corner, they're hooligan. That's a good one. Like these are good to know. I remember getting asked specifically questions about Cowgirl Creamery and who started Cowgirl Creamery. We know about that. Grayson, Meadow Creek Dairy Grayson. Learn where Meadow Creek Dairy is and what was the inspiration for Grayson. I know that sounds odd, but trust me. Taleggio, this is talking about smear ripened cheeses, but this is a heads up that you're going to get asked specifically about farms and about specific cheeses. Taleggio, by the word Taleggio, remember to write tired milk. Tired like I'm exhausted. So tired milk and Taleggio. That's a big heads up for you. And the rest of these, let's see, let's keep going to 122. And you'll see, like, I mean, read through this, but a lot of this is reiteration. Like you've gone through this. Ripening room, but Roquefort, here again. Oh, for all that is holy in this cheese world, no Roquefort inside and out. I promise you're going to get a couple of questions about Roquefort. And then, of course, European law. Know that because that goes into our PDOs. Hopefully you guys are aware of that, and we'll cover that again in another topic. But know about the PDOs, especially Roquefort being the first. But it was the first. When was it? Okay. All righty, the next page, 123. Okay, here, we'll keep going. So this just lists a couple of other styles of American cheeses. Let's see, Old Chatham sheep herding. I would know about them. Okay, so Rogue River Blue. You guys are aware that Rogue River Blue won best cheese in the world a couple years ago. It's an American cheese winning the biggest award. Do you think you get asked about something like that? Probably, yes. So no Rogue River Blue, where it's from, who is the maker, what is wrapped around it, and what are those leaves washed in, and what year and what award did it win? They like to trick that, especially with the ACS. I would also go to their website and know what cheese won best of show what year. They could throw that out there too. Then I've got English Stilton. English Stilton on this one. The main thing I would know is the counties of Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, and Leicestershire. That's where that's made. You're going to get some counties asked about Stilton, more so than anything else. The rest of this is good to know. I'm not gonna drive through all of this. You know, the rest of the page 23. Those were the highlights of that page. So let's keep going to 124. Handling of moldy cheeses. I've got for ripening room conditions needed, the humidity needs to be at more than 95% for brie and camembert to ripen. That seems like an interesting fact. And then moving forward with here, you're going to get into a new term, the geotrichum. Know a geotrichum rind. And you'll see that that is on page 124. The signature sign of geotrichum is the wrinkly, brainy surfaces. And that comes from Matteo Keller. So Matteo, I'd probably listen to him. He's a big dog in the cheese world. But that's where geotrichum, know that. And terms as we continue down to the bottom of 124. Oh, Chatham's got a sheep milk camembert. It's beautiful. I would know the term robiola. This is just robiola is a term. I would look that up, put that on your things to know. And now we're moving to page 125. 125. Again, they're going to get, this is specific cheeses that are bloomy, that have the bloomy mold on it. I'll point out no Cypress Grove Humboldt Fog, inside and out. Cypress Grove Humboldt Fog. Where's it from? Who made it? What is the line of vegetable ash even for? No Cypress Grove Humboldt Fog. Moving along, rind development again. I think we've covered that a couple of times, but definitely know your rind development. Know here, I think we're talking about cloth bound cheeses. So know what's cloth bound versus what's not. And up down here, the bandaging techniques. What is a bandage cheddar? And these are the bandage techniques. So I would know that. But it's more important to know, like, what is a bandage cheddar and how do you apply a bandage cheddar versus the ripening room conditions for bandaging cheddar. You need to know that there is lard involved with the cheesecloth in a cheddaring aspect, and that would make it non-vegetarian friendly, of course. All righty, page 106. 126, excuse me, 126. Jasper Hill, I would put those on a note to learn upside, inside, and out. Jasper Hill and what cheeses have won Best of Show at the Cheese Society before, and they've had a couple. So Jasper Hill is a cornerstone cheese maker and affineur in the United States. Know them. Know about Cabot Cloth Bound. Montgomery's cheddar. I've got that. Read through that one, know it. And then I want to move on down to eye development for eyed cheeses. There we go. Eye development for eyed cheeses. So know where the formation of eyes come from. Propionic fermentation. Know that. That's where your eyes come from. And that is basically, so all of that, the eye formation, I would say at least 1 to 2 questions with eye formation and where it comes from. How does it come about? And so everything, so under eye formation on page 126, read up on all that for sure. Okay, now we're moving to 127. 127, it's got some information, it's pretty cool, but I didn't see as much test questions coming off 127. So let's go to 128. Moving to 128. And flavor and texture development under this. That just carries you through to lactate, lipolysis, and proteolysis. So know all of those terms under flavor and texture development. Know those. All righty. Now to page 129. Okay, so here I'm not going to read everything for you, but here are where we're getting to HACCP. So HACCP, HACCP. Know it. This is, I put a big star on this page. So 129, I just put a big star on this whole page. It's a big one. So the 7 steps, I would know that. Now 7 steps, if they're going to ask you a question on the test about the 7 steps to a good HACCP plan, they would give you like, which one is not a step for a HACCP plan. So that's how they would probably form that question. But I'm pretty sure you're going to get asked about the steps of a HACCP plan. Pretty darn sure. So know that. And again, and in the best practice guide for cheese makers from the American Cheese Society website, that'll go into it a little bit deeper as well. But know that. And then underneath HACCP, of course, hazard analysis, you got to know that. Coming up here. And then good manufacturing practices. You're going to need to know all these acronyms too. GMPS, good manufacturing practices. Those are flashcards just in of itself is acronym flashcards. What does it mean? Because they could, again, a question for HACCP is, what does HACCP stand for? They could easily ask you that question. But understand good manufacturing practices, also good retail practices, know what those are. Sanitation, standard operation procedures. SSOPs, know what that is. SSOPs for the 3-compartment sink. Also for the 3-compartment sink in this area, and you'll find it more specifically in the best practices for cheesemakers, know how to properly clean and sanitize a cutting board in your cheese shop. Please make a note of those steps when you're thinking of washing it, or you rinse it, or do you wash it, or do you sanitize it, do you dry it? When are those steps? Usually you're going to wash it, rinse it, sanitize, dry. Know those steps. Okay. And now for here, cleaning. Anytime you see anything for cleaning, know that too. So again, page 129, pretty darn important. 129, pretty darn important. Let's move to 130. Washing again. I've got these cleaners. Know the differences between a detergent, a solvent cleaner, an acid cleaner, and an abrasive cleaner. Know the differences between those 4. All righty. And the only other thing on that, again, I did write a note about what order to clean your cutting board. Again, know what order to clean your cutting board. You'll find that in your best practices for cheesemakers. Moving on to page 131. Here, that's a cool chart. I wouldn't bog down too deeply into that. I wouldn't bog down too deeply into that chart. I would go down on page 131 and focus more on occupational safety and health agency, OSHA. I would know what OSHA is, what they stand for. And it's of the U.S. Department of Labor. Okay, so they will like Department of Agriculture. What does the Department of Agriculture oversee? So you'll get questions like this. Department of Labor is under OSHA. And we'll get to the other parts. All right, in this, let's keep moving down to page 132. Besides OSHA, now defects. Defects, again, I would stick with your booklets coming out of the ACS website because they're going to go, they actually have the pictures in there. Hopefully we'll have a class where we can go through all that as well. But to highlight on page 132, what to know? Toad skin. So these are off standard conditions. What is toad skin? What is mucor? What is bitterness? There's actually a definition of bitterness. What is it? I'm trying to highlight it on the screen here, having trouble, but know that. And calcium lactate crystals. So on page 132, toad skin all the way to the bottom. Know all of those. 133, moving on to page 133. Good information, but not a whole lot there on my test. Let's move to 134. 134 again, this is good, limiting lactose, but I would focus more on this part, preventing calcium lactate crystals. It's probably the most helpful part on page 134. So let's move to page 135. Here we're going to get into, so chemistry of affinage. Yeah, I would go chemistry of affinage, proteolysis. You got to know this, lipolysis. Know all these terms. So chemistry of affinage, all of these terms all the way down. Go all of those terms and even know a couple of few principles. So most of 135 is a good information for you to know. All righty, now moving to 136. Proteolysis again, big dog. I would know that for sure. So the first part on page 136. And then we're going to go down. Now we're going to talk about pathogens. So let's move on down. Page 136 to pathogens of concern. You are 120% going to be asked about pathogens. Pathogens. Know these. This is for my non-scientific brain. Like, this is the hardest part for me. Like, which pathogen gets which versus which temperature causes which issues. Know those inside and out. So just popping. So know that pathogens here, all of them. Every single one of these pathogens of concerns on page 136. Moving to page 137. That's when it gets deeper into them. Like Campylobacter. Know the causative agent. Where can it be found? Intestinal tracts of cats, dogs, poultry, cattle, and swine. But you know that it comes from the intestinal tracts. Unpasteurized milk can become contaminated. So what happens to you? Like, they will even ask, like, know that can't be like they could list out Campylobacter could cause what symptoms, what short-term symptoms. You got to know: cramping, fever, diarrhea, nausea, headache, vomiting, versus the short-term with Listeria. So Listeria is going to get nausea, vomiting, fevers, chills, headache. So know all those, every single one of those, all the way through Salmonella. Extremely important. You'll probably get asked at least one question on each one at minimum. So they're extremely important to our business. Moving on down to 137, coliforms. Know about that as well. I would just have to say 137 is an extremely important page. The whole page. 138. Oh, it's okay. Here in 138, like, you're going to get more into some of these terms through other glossaries, but I would read through it. Nothing totally crazy on there. Same thing for 139. These are good to know, but you don't know. You need to know the percentages of brine. Never necessarily on 139. So we can move forward with that. All right, just a couple more pages, guys. We'll get through 104 and we'll be able to end. May run just a couple minutes over, but thank you for hanging with me. So we're moving now to module 804. And that's going to be page 142. Is where we're going to start. Let me get there. Page 142. Okay, here we are. Cheese storage and transportation. No, these graphs. This is good to know, like, who all touches the cheese, where it comes from, but you're not going to get asked questions so much about that. But what you are going to get asked a question about, let's look under best methods for storing during transportation from producer to distributor to retailer. So even in your best practice for cheesemaker guide I keep talking about, go over that too, but understand that you will get asked about this. So airship. One thing that has grown exponentially in our industry is airship shipping directly to customers. So the ACS actually gives specific guidelines for proper packing and how much ice packs to put in your box. Know that. That's going to be in your best practice guide for cheese makers. So actually, like, how to tell how much ice packs to put in your cheese, that's specifically on the test, specifically coming from Best Guide to Cheesemakers. So highlight that. You'll need to look up. Also, FIFO. For the love of all the holy cheeses in the world, please know what FIFO is. First in, first out. You should know that already, but that's more than likely you should get one question about FIFO on the test. Okay, we're going to continue on now to page 143. Now, papers and cheese, like how to, again, there's going to be more in your best practices guide for cheese makers, talking about cheese packaging and what cheese is wrapped in. So anytime you see for cheese packaging in your best practice guide for cheese makers, read that section. All righty. So let's keep going. And that's going to be, that's most of what I want you to get out of that chapter, quite honestly. So, all righty. That takes us where we'll pick up on the next training. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for everybody here. But that concludes today's training. So we've gone through now. We'll pick up on module 805 on the next training. And I for sure will add another training in as we move along to make sure that we can cover all of this book and to make sure that, you know, I've called out best practice guides for cheese makers several times today. So I would like to spend a little bit of time on that too as we move along. So know that the next trainings will probably operate like this. We'll go a little bit longer and I'll try to keep up a good speed, but hopefully this is helping you focus and narrow down your studying so that you know what to focus on so you can pass your test. Like always, please reach out to me with any questions. It's naldridge@gfi.com. Let me make sure I give all that. Well, you all should have my email if I've been inviting you to things. So if you have any questions, reach out to me. And next week, when I send out the bi-weekly email to you, I'm going to go ahead and have lists of European cheeses to study, as well as American cheeses and American cheese makers to help narrow down that field of study for you as well. All righty. I hope, let me make sure. I hope you all have a great day and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nate.